Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of The Bitter Pill. So today I want to talk about an event that I imagine most of you have heard, that Nina Turner, who was one of Bernie Sanders' top campaign officials and developed a reputation as a fiery public speaker for social justice causes when she played that role as one of the leaders of Bernie Sanders' campaigns for president in both 2016 and 2020. And anyway, the event I'm referring to is the fact that she just yesterday lost a special election for a congressional seat in Ohio's 11th district, Cleveland and Akron, where she makes her home. And she was expected to win this race against establishment Democrat Shontel Brown. She started the race with a huge lead on everybody and a lead in uh, money raised and so forth, but wound up losing by a few percentage points. And certainly a major factor in that was, or, well, I think probably a major factor in that was all the money that came pouring into the race from establishment Democrats and even some wealthy Republican donors. But I don't think it's as simple as just that big money defeated Nina Turner. So the topic of this video is, why did Nina Turner lose? Um, and I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know exactly why Turner didn't win. It is certainly uh, indicative of something about what's going on, that there was only a 16% voter turnout in this special election, which, since it was just an election all on its own, that's probably one reason for the low turnout. But in any case, I have some ideas about why she might have lost, other than all the establishment money backing Shontel Brown. In other words, I'm going to make the case that at least there's a good chance that Nina Turner could have won, despite that, which we knew was going to happen, right? Uh, Obviously, most of us remember how the political establishment pulled all the stops, pulled every trick they could to defeat Bernie Sanders in 2020, and also in 2016. But in 2020, they managed to essentially take the wind out of Bernie Sanders' sails. You know, Before the campaign, before the voting really got very far along in the Democratic Party primaries. And they similarly swooped in here with Nina Turner's campaign and ran all sorts of dishonest negative ads in the time leading up to the election and so forth. But, the question is, could Nina Turner have won despite that? And I think the answer is, well, yes, she could have, theoretically. She could have run a better campaign. She could have been more forthright in challenging the establishment, etc. Uh, on the other hand, um, let's look at who the Democratic Party is. This is the second most enthusiastic capitalist party, as someone once put it. And, you know, that has an influence on who runs in the Democratic Party, particularly for federal office. So, think about who the very leftmost or progressive extreme of the Democratic Party is. other than Tulsi Gabbard and for a brief time, albeit only on domestic issues, Bernie Sanders during his 2016 campaign, Shahid Buttar is another example that comes to mind. Just a handful of people who have run as Democrats for federal office come to mind as people who have genuinely challenged the Democratic Party establishment. And so the question is, as we've talked about on the show before, I don't think AOC falls into that category, or anybody else in the so-called squad, Rashida Tlaib or Cori Bush, Ilhan Omar, and so forth. They're at best social democrats who, when push comes to shove, are not going to sharply challenge the establishment wing of the Democratic Party. But there are quite a few who, don't see any problem with the squad or Bernie Sanders or Nina Turner, or if they do, just very minor problems. And when people offer substantive critiques of those politicians, these folks like to attack them. And that happened with Nina Turner's campaign and critiques of it and of her by people on the left. Here's YouTube commentator Tim Black bashing critics of Nina Turner and basically just portraying her as if she were someone who walks on water. I think I may play this whole clip, or I may stop it at some point, just to give you an idea of what the sort of left liberal, progressive or justice Democrat supporting YouTubers and others who take that perspective are like. What their take on things is. He's being interviewed here by Jordan Chariton of Status Quo, who, although he does great reporting, takes a similar perspective of being relatively uncritical of the squad or Bernie Sanders or Nina Turner. So let's watch.
So Tim Black, obviously of YouTube. So I hear you drove here 7 hours with the fam.
7 hours, brother. 7 hours, and we had to do it, brother. Thing about it is I wanted to be in D.C. when I was halfway coming because of with the demonstrations in D.C., but I said I'll double back after this and go attend those as well.
So, I mean, the obvious question, right now there's been a lot of doom and gloom in the progressive world. A lot of people think it's all for nothing, everybody's a fraud. What made you get in the car 7 hours for Nina Turner? What about Nina Turner makes you think she's different?
Well, for one, Nina Turner's been telling me the same things, talking the same language for as long as I've known her, 6 years. And I can't believe that people believe that she does not support Medicare for all. It's like, to me, it's like the most disingenuous smear there could be. I mean, say something else. I mean, this is like the cornerstone of everything she's been talking about. Nina Turner was the...
Okay, well, let's stop right there for a moment. He's saying that people who are critical of Nina Turner are claiming that she doesn't support Medicare for all. Well, I think he knows this. Maybe he doesn't. But the criticisms of Nina Turner have, as we talked about in the last episode of the show, not that simple. It's not that we're saying that she doesn't support Medicare for all. If it came up for a vote in Congress, I think she would vote for it. No question. The issue is, how hard is she going to fight for it? As we talked about in the last episode, she has passed up opportunity after opportunity to work with activists who, grassroots organizers who are pushing for Medicare for all. She was contacted numerous times by organizers of the Force the Vote protests in town hall back in December and January, where the idea was to get the squad or other Medicare for all supporting congresspeople to pressure Nancy Pelosi to bring the Medicare for all bill to the floor of the House for a vote by threatening to withhold their vote from Nancy Pelosi when she was running for re-election for Speaker of the House. Not only did they not do that, but none of them, and not Nina Turner either, responded to invitations to attend and speak at the Force the Vote town hall, which was a town hall about Medicare for all. Didn't even give your organizers who contacted her office and other progressive politicians' office repeatedly, not even the courtesy of a response. Same thing happened with the recent marches for Medicare for all, where in over 50 cities around the country, as we talked about a couple of weeks ago on this show, protests in favor of Medicare for all took place, including in Columbus, Ohio, just down the road from Cleveland and Akron, where Nina Turner is based and was running her campaign for Ohio's 11th Congressional District, covering most of Cleveland and Akron, I guess. Again, Nina Turner did not even offer the courtesy of a response to that invitation. Didn't say a word about the marches for Medicare for all, didn't promote them, didn't send a message of support to the Columbus March, as Pramila Jayapal did. Pramila Jayapal being the congresswoman who wrote the Medicare for All bill, Jayapal sent a videotaped message to the March for Medicare for All that took place in Seattle, offering her support and saying, why Medicare for All was important and so forth. Nina Turner did no such thing. She just had a regular campaign event, well, a big campaign event because she had AOC in town, but a campaign event there in Cleveland, Ohio, on the same day as the March for Medicare for All, and didn't even mention anything about those protests. So that's one of many examples of why the criticisms of Nina Turner are not as simple as Tim Black is making them out to be here. And I don't know whether he's just ignorant or disingenuous. But anyway, let's continue.
Darling of the Democrats, until she endorsed Bernie Sanders. We were just up here talking about how they all were panicking, trying to get her to attend their rallies and to open up their events back in 2015. She walked away from all of that. And this is how they treat her. When things get tough, they blame her. And that's the reason, Jordan, you're the only person I'm telling this to. And I'm so glad you and I have cleared the air totally, man. And I'm so glad because I want to share this with somebody that I can count on. Brother, the way that they have been, to me, what they've been trying to do is stop our movement. Now, I know this movement ain't perfect, but it's the best thing we got going, and there are good people in it. And just because they don't always do what you want them to do every time out doesn't mean they don't want the same things you want.
So he's actually got the gall here to accuse those of us who have been critical of Nina Turner and members of the squad and Bernie Sanders and so forth for not fighting as hard as they could for Medicare for all and other progressive social changes. For example, a bailout bill for COVID that didn't favor the rich and give peanuts to the rest of us. He actually has the audacity, Mr. Tim Black, of accusing those of us who criticize these Justice Democrats for not fighting hard enough for the causes that our movement is actively engaged in promoting. He's accusing us of trying to undermine that movement. Fuck you, Tim Black. Fuck you. Jesus.
I can't fathom people that believe Nina Turner doesn't want Medicare for all, or environmental justice, or racial justice, or anything qualified immunity. Those are the cornerstones. So these people
or people that think she won't fight when she gets
or people that think, bro, if she wanted the easy, she wouldn't be with us. What's the money for? All the money. They spent $250,000 on her, against her. What, you think that's for charity? Why do it? I mean, it's like, where's the fucking logic? I'm sorry, bro, but where's the logic, bro? Like, if...
Okay, well, again, obviously they did the same thing to Bernie Sanders, and Bernie Sanders has shown us over and over again that he will roll over for the Democratic Party establishment when push comes to shove. Joe Biden was my good friend, Joe Biden, and he's going to be the most progressive Democrat since FDR, most progressive president, and all this stuff. He voted for the CARES Act, which was mostly a giveaway to the wealthy. He's literally not even talked about Medicare for all, which was his signature issue during both of his campaigns. He hasn't talked about that at all this entire fucking year. Close to the same for AOC, etc. And, Nina Turner certainly has nothing to say about any of this. Okay, well, I'm going to put a link to this video, and you can watch the rest of it you want. But it continues in the same vein. Basically, Tim, and Jordan Chariton agrees with him, keeps going on about how great Nina Turner is and how horrible it is that people to her left would dare to criticize her and sabotage our movement, as he puts it. Well, I mean, that's ludicrous. But, let's get back to the main issue at hand here. Why, other than the big money from the Democratic establishment and the Republican establishment, particularly in both cases, lobbyists for Israel. Not that Nina Turner has really said much about Israel and Palestine, but they presumed correctly that she was not going to be a bootlicker for Israel and for U.S. support of Israeli apartheid to the extent that Chantel Brown will be. But anyway, I thought Margaret Kimberley of Black Agenda Report put the question that we need to ask here about Nina Turner well. She said, a lot to say about Nina Turner, about Nina Turner losing and so forth. But this is my question. Would she have been any different from the squad and the rest of the all talk, no action, quote, progressives? So that's the question we should be trying to answer here, because I think that's the key to understanding why Nina Turner didn't do better, because basically like all these Justice Democrat types like Tim Brown and Jordan Chariton, who calls those of us critical of people like Nina Turner phony leftist tweeters celebrating Turner's loss. I don't know anybody that's celebrating Nina Turner's loss. And we're not phony, Jordan Chariton. We're the real deal. So I don't know what the fuck your problem is. Here's what Emma Vigeland had to say, formerly of TYT, now with the Majority Report. Another sort of, really, I mean, she's a different sort of animal than Jordan Chariton. Kind of a liberal establishment Democrat. Hated Tulsi Gabbard. Supported Elizabeth Warren as well as, to some extent, Bernie Sanders during the campaign. And just generally shitty politics as, the TYT that we've all become familiar with over the last few years since they got that $20 million from mainstream Democratic Party bigwigs. Anyway, she says that People's Party must be thrilled that Nina Turner lost. What a victory to see that McCarthyite imperialist go down, one step closer to Medicare for all. Okay, so all of this is obviously sarcastic, but and I'm not going to respond to all of this, but the main thing to bear in mind here and to notice about all this is the People's Party actually endorsed Nina Turner. The People's Party is a third party that's just getting off the ground and is running candidates starting in 2022. They endorsed Nina Turner. So, why would they be thrilled that Nina Turner lost? She doesn't really know what she's talking about, or maybe she's just making shit up. I don't know. Okay, so that's what these folks' perspective on leftist critiques of Nina Turner are. But, I mean, what did we really have to say about Nina Turner? Why were we critical of her? Well, again, basically, as Margaret Kimberley asks, how is she, how would she have been any different than the Squad or Bernie Sanders or Pramila Jayapal or any of the other sort of left-leaning, but definitely not socialist or anti-imperialist Democrats. I've talked at length a number of times about the failings of the Squad and Bernie Sanders over the last few years. So, as I've talked about before on this show, you basically find no support from any members of the Squad or Bernie Sanders for Julian Assange. In terms of foreign policy, none of them support boycott, divestment, and sanctions, or really take a hardline anti-imperialist policy with respect to the Israeli occupation of and genocide against the Palestinians. They're not calling it genocide. They're not calling it apartheid. None of them backed the women who accused Joe Biden of sexually harassing or assaulting them. I think maybe Rashida Tlaib did to some extent. But anyway, on issue after issue in terms of foreign policy, uh, the squad and Bernie Sanders have fallen short. On civil liberties, at least in terms of support for Julian Assange, they've fallen short. In terms of standing up to the Democratic Party establishment and to Joe Biden, uh, you know, they've fallen short. Pramila Jayapal said that so far she gave Joe Biden's presidency an A. AOC said he was doing much better than expected. Basically, was a pleasant surprise. All the while, if you look at Joe Biden's record as president, there is not one single fucking campaign promise, I don't think, that he hasn't already broken in the 7 months or so he's been president. He's broken them all. Every fucking one. No $15 minimum wage. I mean, he didn't even try to push very hard for that. No public option on health care. No relief for student debt. You can just go down the list of things that he promised when he was campaigning, and all these promises, none of them were delivered. I guess he did get back into the Paris Climate Accords that Trump pulled the U.S. out of. Big fucking deal, It doesn't really do anything substantive about climate change. But, he's made things worse in terms of foreign policy. Bombing Syria more than Trump did. He's pulled troops out of Afghanistan but put them in Syria. That sanctions against Cuba and Syria are as bad as ever, and just on and on. What are our so-called progressive members of Congress saying about any of this? Well, not much. I guess there were a few noises from some of them about it being illegal for Joe Biden to bomb Syria without seeking congressional authorization. But most of them didn't say anything about that. And they certainly weren't as critical of Biden for doing that as they were of Trump. But back to Nina Turner. As you can see there, I did a search of Twitter for any mention of Israel, Palestine, BDS, boycott, divestment, sanctions, Venezuela, Bolivia, Tara Reade, Biden, Julian Assange, or Syria in Nina Turner's Twitter thread, starting from the beginning of 2019, when the presidential campaign began, and when the squad, or the original members of the squad, AOC, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, and Ayanna Pressley took office. Up until now, basically Nina Turner says abso-fucking-lutely nothing about foreign policy. I haven't looked at her campaign website, so I could be wrong about this, but from what I've heard, there's no discussion of foreign policy on her website, really. Again, let me know if I'm wrong, but she certainly doesn't talk about it. She doesn't talk about Julian Assange. She's never said anything about Tara Reade or the other women who have accused Joe Biden of sexually assaulting or harassing them. Basically very uncritical of Joe Biden. And I already mentioned, no response to invitations to the Force the Vote town hall back in January. No comment about that initiative, other than, I think it was a couple of months after the fact in an interview with, I'm blanking on her name at the moment, a supporter of Force the Vote, with a YouTube show. Oh, God, why am I blanking on her name? I'm gonna kick myself for not remembering it. Brianna Joy Gray, okay, who was also part of Bernie Sanders. She was the press secretary for Bernie Sanders' campaign, but she's since been kind of critical of the Justice Democrats. But anyway, she asked Nina Turner about forced vote, and basically Nina Turner refused to criticize the squad's failure to pressure Nancy Pelosi to bring Medicare for All up for a vote through threatening to withhold their vote for Speaker of the House, and basically said that I don't know her exact words. I'd have to look back at the interview, but basically just gave the impression that she wouldn't have acted any differently from the squad, that she too would have voted for Nancy Pelosi for Speaker of the House with no strings attached. As I said before, she didn't respond to invitations to speak at the March for Medicare for All in Columbus, Ohio. Not even to say, no, I'm busy with campaigning, just no response. And my friend on Twitter, Misty Winston from Columbus, was she kind of led the organizing for the March for Medicare for All in Columbus, Ohio. And she told me today in a DM that she contacted Nina Turner numerous times to try and at least get some sort of response from her about the March for Medicare for All there in Columbus, and got no response whatsoever. There's also and just some questions you've got to ask about how her campaign was run and who was running it. Apparently, she was directly advised to not talk about Joe Biden at all during her campaign, not to criticize his right-wing policies. And until pretty late in the game, when by that point there had been literally millions of dollars spent on negative advertising against her that defamed her in every imaginable dishonest way. It wasn't until the tail end of the campaign that Turner's campaign responded with negative ads of their own, that in contrast to Brown's campaign, were factual and honest, but that criticized Brown's corruption and so forth. And also my understanding is that it wasn't until quite late in the game that there was door-to-door canvassing by Nina's campaign. I can't imagine that there wouldn't have been more than a 16% voter turnout if there had been a sustained, extensive effort over, the many months that this campaign has taken place. And I'm sure there was some of that, but not enough. And you could say, well, maybe she didn't have the money. Maybe she couldn't get enough people to volunteer, etc. But that begs the question: well, why weren't more on the left more enthusiastic about Nina Turner's campaign? Is it our fault if we weren't, given all the stuff that I've told you? I don't think so. I think it's the candidate's responsibility to demonstrate that they deserve your support. And given all that I've said so far, I think you can see why I don't think she has. But let's have a look at somebody else's opinion about this. I came across a really excellent article. Uh, this is by Dontel, who I forget what the name of his YouTube podcast is, but he has he writes on Substack. This article says there's enough evidence for the left to not trust Nina Turner. So he starts out. Over the last 2 years, there have been several defining moments for the working class movement that organized around the idea of upending the neoliberal status quo by doing a hostile takeover of the Democratic Party, which I should remind you, as I've talked about many times on this show before, as I've written about this attempt to do a hostile takeover of the Democratic Party has been this has been attempted many, many times in the past. The Freedom Democrats in the 60s associated with the civil rights movement. The efforts by leftist organizers in the labor movement, Communist Party, and so forth to enter the Democratic Party and try to push it to the left from inside in the 1930s. That didn't work. The Jesse Jackson campaign in the 1980s. Dennis Kucinich's campaigns, obviously Bernie Sanders' campaigns. It's never worked. It's not gonna work. That should be obvious by now. You can't make a revolution in a counter-revolutionary party, as Jill Stein said many times. It's not going to happen. So Dontel goes on to say, in each and every one of these chapters, the politicians we elected to advance our agenda folded without so much as a whimper, let alone a knockdown, drag-out fight on our behalf. Okay, I'm going to need my glasses because the print's too small here. Many of the activists and volunteers who would have done anything to elect progressive Democrats just a few years ago are now questioning the effectiveness of their efforts and whether this strategy will ever produce any meaningful policy results in their lifetime. Some say it's not fair to judge current candidates like Nina Turner for the failures of politicians like AOC and Bernie, who are already elected, and that we should judge her by her actions. There's some merit to that, which is why I have a litany of concerns specific to her candidacy. And let's also acknowledge that it's reasonable to draw conclusions about her future actions by the company that she keeps, i.e., the squad and Bernie Sanders and so on and so forth. That's who she associates with and who she identifies with politically. And they've been letting us down for, a long time now. So, as a result of that, people are skeptical about giving money and votes to politicians like Nina Turner, promising to fight for our agenda while they're in lockstep with the charlatans who made the same promises only to turn into loyal partisan hacks, especially when there's no effort from Nina Turner to distinguish herself from the questionable actions of her peers, i.e. Bernie Sanders and AOC and the rest of the Justice Democrats. Nina Turner is, as he says, in lockstep with Justice Democrats. So, when they didn't push single payer, when they didn't push as hard as they could for, a $15 minimum wage, when they, went along with the obscene corporate bailout of the CARES Act, they showed us that they weren't willing to fight for us when we needed them most, in the middle of a pandemic where, 15 million people, lost their health insurance because they lost their jobs, where, the fact that we didn't have Medicare for all resulted in an estimated 1/3 of the deaths that have occurred because of the coronavirus. Um, and just to remind you of how many people that is, some of you may watch Jimmy Dore, and he's given a bit of misinformation about this. He said 300,000 people had died of COVID in the United States. It's actually well over 600,000. So as a result, he lowballed the figure for how many people died because they couldn't get access to or were scared to get access to because they're afraid of the bills treatment for COVID. About 200,000 people have died because of lack of universal health care. It's been estimated by a study that was done on that. So Dontel goes on to say that it's true that Nina Turner wasn't a sitting member of Congress at the time, but she wasn't powerless. She was one of the most prominent left figures in politics. Former Our Revolution president, co-chair of Bernie's campaign, a respected grassroots organizer. She was in a powerful position, a unique position to mount direct actions in a public pressure campaign demanding a people's bailout rather than the CARES Act. But she didn't do that. She said nothing about the fact that we had this obscene policy, unlike that in any other country. I mean, you can look at what was done in other countries. In the UK, 80% of workers' salaries were paid if they were laid off during a lockdown. Denmark, 75%. Netherlands, 90%. Canada, $2,000 a month, $2,000 a month universal basic income. Australia is $1,000 per month. The U.S., $1,200 check, and then a $600 check. What was it? 8 months later, and then they promised us $2,000, and instead they delivered $1,400. And Nina Turner didn't say anything about any of that. And then almost a year after that decision to leave us for dead in an emergency with insufficient government assistance, the Justice Democrats, specifically in the House, had a chance at redemption. At the time, 15 million people lost their insurance in the unemployment chaos. At the time, 500,000 had died. Mostly, well, not mostly, he says that, but largely from the fact that we didn't have a single-payer healthcare system. But in a dream scenario, Justice Democrats had the power to not only force a vote on their key policy issue, Medicare for All, which at the time was needed more than ever because so many people lost their health insurance, and we had this situation where people were dying or getting extremely sick in droves. People think about the 600,000 plus deaths from COVID, but they don't think about the fact that millions and millions of people have gotten very severely ill, perhaps had to go to the hospital, perhaps developed long-term and often disabling COVID symptoms that they're still suffering with today in many cases. Millions of people have had that happen. It's just ruined their life. And where's our government? But anyway, the story. They had the opportunity to basically force Nancy Pelosi, if she wanted to remain Speaker of the House, to bring Medicare for All to the floor of the House for a vote. During a pandemic when it was more important than ever. It wouldn't have passed. Nobody's saying that it would have, but it would have been the very first opportunity in history for there to be a floor debate and vote on the legislation that's been the centerpiece of many of these politicians' campaigns. and they didn't do it. Um, Even worse, not only did they not do it, not only did they ignore invitations to speak at the Force to Vote town hall, but even worse than that, prominent advocates of Medicare for All, like Pramila Jayapal, decided to gaslight their own supporters with disingenuous excuses that boil down to it's a bad time to vote on Medicare for All. What better time is there than in the midst of a pandemic to have a floor debate and vote on Medicare for All? Okay, so Nina Turner never said anything about that. In fact, she more or less defended the squad for not pushing to force the vote on Medicare for All. Other red flags. I mentioned already that Nina, brought on Jeff Weaver to be her campaign advisor, and he was basically the establishment Democrat who really played a major role in running Bernie Sanders' 2020 campaign into the ground. And he didn't do so great a job in 2016 either, although there were other redeeming factors during that campaign that helped it be competitive throughout. But anyway, Donatell goes on to say, Unapologetic is the name of his YouTube show. You should check it out. It's great. Nina Turner has hired DNC operatives to be her press secretary and regional organizing director. Going through social media, they've both worked for corporate Democrats and the DNC. Both of them have. They almost exclusively follow staff of people like Pelosi and Biden. They've never mentioned Medicare for All once. So why is this staunch advocate of Medicare for All bringing people like that into prominent positions in her campaign? There are also questions around whether she's willing to stand up to the war machine as a member of Congress, as I already talked about. 4 months ago, Biden committed impeachable war crimes when he illegally bombed Syria. It's an act of war that doesn't have the president doesn't have legal authority to just bomb places without authorization from Congress, and in fact, that is an impeachable offense. Actually, Tulsi Gabbard, when she was in Congress, introduced articles of impeachment against Donald Trump that included arguing for impeaching him based on his illegal bombing and other illegal, not congressionally authorized, and violating international law actions in Syria, trying to effect regime change in Syria. As a member of Congress, it would have been Nina Turner's job to be a check on the executive branch, especially when it comes to its ever-expanding war powers. Not only was she silent as it happened, but still to this day there's no mention of this by Nina Turner. There's a similar absence on the issue of Israel. While there was and still is an escalation of violence in the decades-long genocide of Palestinians facilitated by the U.S., the silence from Turner is deafening. Now remember, I showed you a few minutes ago, there's been nothing on Nina Turner's Twitter feed about Israel, Palestine, BDS, etc. In the entire 2.5 years I did a search of her Twitter feed. And, we all remember, right, how it was all over the news in May that Israel was committing ethnic cleansing in East Jerusalem, and then they started bombing Gaza, murdered hundreds of people, and even very mainstream human rights organizations like Human Rights Watch, B'Tselem, the Israeli human rights organization, called Israeli policy one of even mainstream media outlets were bringing on commentators that were very harshly critical of Israel's actions, including an interview with an activist on the ground in East Jerusalem, Mohammed Al-Kurd, I think is his name. He was on CNN, I believe. So, criticism of this horrific, just brutal, violent action from Israel and just the total dehumanization of the Palestinian people. Nina Turner has not one fucking word to say about this? When even liberals, even some conservatives are talking about it, and fucking Nina Turner won't say a word. What the hell? Why should we expect someone who has nothing to say about this very important foreign policy issue that everyone at the time is talking about, back in May, and she's silent about it? Why would we expect her to have decent foreign policy? Why would we expect that? There's no reason to expect that she would be good on foreign policy if she's silent on an issue like that, when it's, trending, every day on Twitter for a month. Come on. And finally, he says what I've been saying on Twitter to Jordan Chariton and others, and said about the interview with Tim Black. Stop with a straw man or straw manning of her critics. Many people who were avid supporters of electing progressive have been burned too many times to be willfully ignorant and ignore all these red flags. Some articulate their frustrations with angry tweets. Some cancel donations. Either way, the skepticism is valid. That's why I find it particularly insulting when prominent figures straw man us and talk down to us as if we're petulant children throwing a tantrum. The latest example of this has been Jordan Chariton's response to critics of his Nina Turner interview. For the last week, Jordan has been on the road doing reporting on the eviction and homelessness crisis across the country. And Status Quo, Jordan's channel that he and Jen Dice co-founded, they do great work in terms of investigative reporting. Maybe better than anybody else in the country, but their political takes are often not so hot. In fact, I initially avoided adding to the backlash from the interview so as not to create a distracting media spectacle as he was on the ground doing important reporting. My opinion on that changed when Jordan decided to double and triple down on this insulting misrepresentation of members of his audience, even. In a 2-hour live stream broadcast to his blah, blah, blah. He went as far to label certain critics as dangerous extremists. Critics of Nina Turner as dangerous extremists several times. You can't have it both ways. When these politicians want to have the resources and clout that comes from millions of leftists across the country supporting them, we're one big happy movement. But the second we try to hold them accountable, suddenly we're strangers, and conveniently they only have to answer to the people in their district, he says. Okay, I'm going to link to this article. I'm reading most of it, but, there's more. It's not a foregone conclusion that having a spine will cost Nina Turner the election. Well, she didn't have a spine and it cost her the election. But even if it did, so what? The left's obsession with electoral politics has led to a willingness to abandon all principles if it means we get the Pyrrhic victory of having just one more person in Congress who nominally agrees with us on policy. The force to vote moment show that means nothing if they aren't willing to stand up for what they claim to believe. So yeah, okay, let's say that, there hadn't been quite so much dark money flooding into the campaign, and maybe she pulled off a win. But if she couldn't be, a forceful critic of the Democratic Party establishment and a forceful advocate for the policies that she ran on, what's the point in having her? And the flip side of that is, okay, you know, there's a chance that if she had, taken a very principled stand and come out strongly against Joe Biden and against the Democratic Party establishment in general, said something about foreign policy, uh, didn't just ghost grassroots activists who were on the ground working on the important issues that she says she stands for. If she had done better on all that, okay, I think she would have had a much better chance of winning the election if, for example, she had given Medicare for all activists the time of day and so on and so forth, as we've talked about. But, yeah, of course, she could have lost. But, I mean, she did lose. She already lost anyway. So, you may as well you lose when you're taking a principled stand than do so while you're trying to, basically go along to get along and try to win the race that way. Obviously that didn't work. I'm not holding my breath, but hopefully she'll learn some lessons from this campaign and do better next time. She'll probably, this was a special election for a seat that's up for election again next fall. So, maybe she'll run again. Maybe she'll be a little better, but, I don't really have a lot of hope for that because, as I said, generally speaking, there are certain types of people who run for federal office in the Democratic Party, and either they're just totally sold out and corrupt as hell, or they're like the AOCs and Bernie Sanders of the world. They talk a good game, but when push comes to shove, they're not fighters. They say they are, but they're not. And as Donatella says, there's more than enough evidence for any reasonable person to come to the conclusion that Nina Turner will be no different from the 10 other members of the Association of Snake Oil Salesmen, as he refers to all these Justice Democrats who talk a good game but really don't deliver on their promises to go to Washington and fight for us. And, just to sum up, well, let me show you real quickly a nice little piece from Danny Haifong from Black Agenda Report. The politics of spectacle on eviction moratorium, the squad talks the walk. So they don't walk the walk, they talk the walk. The squad, a subset of members of the House of Representatives who espouse Bernie Sanders' policy agenda, gathered at the Capitol building to demand that Congress come back to work and hold a vote to renew the moratorium. And this, this was at the very last minute when the moratorium was set to expire, moratorium on evictions, the very next day. So Cori Bush, Jamal Bowman, and other squad members slept on the Capitol steps overnight to protest the failure of Congress to act to renew the moratorium on evictions that came into being as a result of emergency actions regarding the pandemic. The CDC actually initiated it because in their judgment it was a risk for increasing the spread of COVID for lots of people to be kicked out of their homes. Critics on social media pointed out that the rally was too little too late, while others remarked that the low attendance of the rally, comprised mainly of political surrogates, such as staff members for the squad, rendered the action nothing more than a photo opportunity for the squad. Founder of Black Agenda Report, Danny's publication, Glenn Ford, died just before the protests. Ford strongly opposed the politics of diversity, which privileged political representation, such as people of color like AOC and Cori Bush and so forth getting elected to Congress over substantive policy demands and the popular power required to achieve them. Ford closely monitored the Congressional Black Caucus to demonstrate that voting for elected officials who look and behave like their, in this case, black constituents does not necessarily equate to representation. Ford led Black Agenda Report's effort to expose how the CBC, for example, voted in large majorities to militarize U.S. police departments and enshrine their officers with protected class status under hate crime legislation. The squad combines the politics of diversity with the politics of spectacle. Unlike Obama, who openly chastised black Americans and separated himself from the left, in sort of a Cosby-esque fashion, you may recall. He was constantly berating black fathers and so forth. The squad professes to stand with working people and walk the walk. Representative Cori Bush and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez frequently identify themselves as organizers in a bid to relate to their young left-leaning supporters. This was evident in their response to the expiration of the eviction moratorium, which has left more than 11 million Americans at risk of eviction. And even with Biden's recent decision to renew the moratorium, several million Americans are still facing eviction because it was only a partial renewal. It was only in areas where rates of COVID are high. The squad took to the streets as organizers in the hours before the policy ended, despite offering little more than statements in the months leading up to July 31st. Even worse, the squad has struggled just as much as the rest of the Democratic Party to articulate just who is to blame for the negligence surrounding the eviction moratorium. Members of the squad have been hesitant to cast full blame for the crisis onto House Speaker Nancy Pelosi or President Joe Biden. Because remember, the Democratic Party controls the presidency. Joe Biden's a Democrat, the House and the Senate, albeit narrowly. So how can you not blame the Democrats to a large extent for the fact that this moratorium was about to expire? It turned out Joe Biden had the power to do something about the expiration of the moratorium all along, but he didn't take action until after it had expired. The squad's politics of spectacle. Such stark contradictions speak to the differences between political spectacle and political substance. Political spectacle feigns support for the interests of working people. For example, organizing a small protest to the eviction moratorium, or tweeting daily about the ills facing the working class, while failing to take the necessary action to ensure that the interests of working people become a material reality. If members of the squad were interested in substantive political action, then they would use their leverage as a result of being members of Congress and having millions of Twitter followers and being in the position of having a narrow edge for their party in the House so that they can withhold their vote from important legislation in order to exert pressure for changes. They could use their leverage to force demands such as housing for all upon their colleagues and hold continuous rallies until these demands were met. But they don't. The squad's loyalty to the politics of spectacle is further underscored when imperialism enters the debate. Imperialism is a litmus test for anyone who claims the title of left or radical. I would add to that, Julian Assange and some other issues, but certainly foreign policy is a litmus test that AOC and the rest of the squad and Bernie Sanders and certainly Nina Turner have failed miserably. While AOC and the squad have cast votes against the U.S.'s bloated military budget, they have failed to make the issue of militarism a priority issue. On numerous occasions, members of the squad have repeated the State Department's racist narratives about Venezuela, Syria, and other countries targeted by U.S. sanctions and military interventions. AOC has even stood with the fascists responsible for the destructive coup in Bolivia in 2019. Well, she's also denounced the coup, but she did pose for a photo op with literal fascists in Bolivia. I guess if you click on this link, you'll get to a picture of that. Crises reveal the true character of social systems and the governments that manage them. Crises like the worst pandemic since the early 1900s. The COVID-19 pandemic has demonstrated that not even the most, quote, progressive elected officials in the U.S. are willing to do what is necessary to meet the needs of the people. Millions are at risk of homelessness amid the spread of COVID-19's Delta variant, and millions more, we can add, have lost their health insurance in a country where 30 million people were already uninsured during the pandemic. Yet not one member of the squad has proposed freezing rent or seizing vacant housing stock from the banks to ensure everyone has a roof over their head. In the U.S., the politics of spectacle reigns supreme. Mass movements must build alternatives to the Democratic Party to strengthen their base of popular power moving forward. Nice article from Danny. You should follow him on Twitter and read his articles on Black Agenda Report and follow BAR's YouTube channel where he's the main host, along with Margaret Kimberley. But, just to conclude, Margaret asks, there's a lot to say about Nina Turner, but this is my question. Would she have been different from the squad and the rest of the all talk, no action, quote, progressives? My friends, the answer is no. All right, I hope you've enjoyed this episode of The Bitter Pill. I will see you next time.